Hey folks, this is a tutorial for making the Edge-Lit Acrylic project with 6 LEDs. This is part 2 of the tutorial, and in this one we're going to be making the actual acrylic part using Inkscape. We're going to need an image of some variety, and we're going to learn how to do a couple of Boolean functions in here as well to be able to make this acrylic plaque which fits into our box. So I'm going to be doing the local hockey team, the Comox Glacier Kings. So to begin with everything, let's do a quick Google image search, and there's our one. So I'm just going to right click and copy this image and bring it into Inkscape and paste it in. Okay, so that's it for the image for a second. What I really want to start with is, I want to make the like the rest of the box part. So let me show you a couple other examples here. This is the mini Edge-Lit Acrylic project. And so on some of these, we just have just a square block sitting up top. On a couple of the other ones, we've actually cut the shape out, which I think looks a little bit neater. The part that actually has the light reflecting off of it is basically like engraved with frosting from the laser engraver. So to do that, we just need to make these shapes black. And so if they're black and they get engraved just on the surface of the acrylic, it just basically frosts the surface and it gives us this reflection. The parts that aren't engraved, so just white space, just come out clear like this and the light doesn't shine through it. So you can use this to your advantage to get some neat contrast for some kind of images. Or you can get some really cool details in there like with our evil Santa here. Here's another one where I've taken the shape of Vancouver Island and I've used that shape to cut out the top of this acrylic piece. So we're going to be doing the Glacier Kings, and the idea of this is that I want the top circle of the logo to be cut out. I don't want the bottom circle of the logo to be cut out, obviously, so I need to make this shape first. So let's start with that. So in Inkscape, the first thing that you should do is set up your document properties. So step number 1, set your default units to millimeters. And number 2, make sure that your custom size units are in millimeters and change the size of the page to 600 millimeters. That just makes it the same size as the laser and that helps things later on. Okay. Now with that done, what you're going to want to do is start by making a box. So it doesn't really matter what size the box is. It might show up like this for you. It might end up being kind of invisible, hollow on the inside. As long as these little markers are here, you actually have made a box. You just need to change the fill and stroke colors. So if your box isn't showing up at all, just try clicking on the fill just to try to change the color of it. So clicking on any color down here changes the fill. We want it to be white. And change the stroke to this red here. It's specifically this red, the second one from the black and grays. And change the stroke by holding down Shift as you do so. Okay. Next up, open up the fill and stroke menu under Object. And go to stroke style for a second and just make sure that your box is actually 0.1 pixel thick. We're going to keep changing this as we go. So next, grab the mouse tool. So you can grab your part here. And we need to make this a very specific size because we need it to fit inside of our wooden box that we're making, which is going to be exactly 96 millimeters wide. Okay. Make sure that you don't have this lock, like the proportion lock on. If you did, and you change the size of the width to whatever, the size of the height is going to change as well. So while we're only changing one dimension at a time, just make sure that that is off. 96 millimeters. Okay. Now, if this is a circle, and it's a perfect circle, I want it to be 96 millimeters wide, which means it's going to be 96 millimeters tall. And so if I want half of this shape to be included up and above the box here, then I need to accommodate for a little bit of space down underneath it. So what I actually want to do, I want to have a little notch here so that our piece of acrylic notches into our box, but I also want to leave a little bit of extra space here so that our circle has some space underneath it so that, the circle doesn't start right at the bottom of the box there. So what I'm going to do is do a little bit of quick math. If I want half the circle to be included, that would be 48 millimeters. I'm going to do a 3 millimeter little gap down here. And let's say I want to add 7 millimeters to everything. So 48 plus 3 plus 7 would be 58 millimeters tall that I want this to be. You can make it any size you like. I'm just making it this big because that's what's going to fit my project. Of note at this point in time, if you're planning on making this like a whole foot tall, the LEDs may not be powerful enough to be able to shine the light all the way through there. And if you wanted to have something sticking way out over the edges like this, the light may not shine through sideways through the acrylic very well. The box kind of directs the light up. So I would recommend making your shape 96 millimeters wide, and whatever is going to come up at the top is going to come up at the top. Okay, so here's the starting point of our box, 96 by 58, and I'm going to change the stroke style to 0.1 pixels right now, just to make sure that it's set exactly the way that I want it. You'll notice that these sizes change a tiny bit. We're talking like hundredths of a millimeter. That doesn't really matter at this stage of the game. So next, let's zoom in just a little bit so we can see the lines of our box a bit better. And I'm going to make a couple other small rectangles. So I'm just going to make one because I want these both to be exactly the same size. Go back to the Select and Transform button. And I want these to be exactly 3 millimeters by 3 millimeters. Okay. Now, when you change the size of a box, this also changes your stroke size. So change this back to 0.1 pixel. And then I need two of these shapes, so you can either copy and paste with Control C and Control V, or you could also just hit Control and D, and that has made a duplicate copy. Okay, we only need two, so this part and this part. If you hold Shift, you can get two parts at once. I need to align these together, so I could, move one so that it fits over top of the other. If you're selecting both at the same time, they're going to move together. So what I want to use actually is the alignment menu of Inkscape here so that I can get this exactly in the right place. So I want to align things relative to the biggest object this time around because I don't want my big box to move. I want to have this shape and hold Shift to select the second shape. I want them to be lined up on the left edge, and I want them to be lined up on the bottom edge, just like that. This one here, same thing, hold Shift to select the box, slide it over to the right side, and align it on the bottom. Okay. Now, assuming that the fill and stroke are the same for all of our parts here, we should be able to do what's called a Boolean function. So we have these 6 functions under path here. And so basically what they do is that they say, okay, if you have shape 1 and shape 2, you could say join them together. You could use one to cut the shape away from the other one. What we're actually going to be doing is an exclusion. So highlight everything and click exclusion. And if all goes to plan, we should have excluded these little notches out of our shape now, because an exclusion says any part that's common to both shapes is now going to get excluded from this big shape, which is what we've done. Okay. So now what we need to do is get this circle onto this shape here. So what I'm going to do is, first off, I want to trace this picture. So under Path, use Trace Bitmap. And turn on the live preview so you can see what's going to happen. This being a color picture, there's lots of different elements of this which are going to show up or maybe not show up, depending on the brightness cutoff threshold here. So if I drop this threshold, you'll see that more and less of the shape gets picked up. So if I go all the way down to 0.1, there's no part of this picture that's dark enough to get included in our new traced picture. If I go all the way up to, say, 0.8, suddenly the entire background gets filled in and you're starting to lose a bunch of details because there's too much of the picture getting picked up. So I'm going to go somewhere in between. Let's go somewhere about like 0.43, 0.44. That looks good to me. And so what I've just done is I've traced the picture and dragged it over here. So this looks pretty good. There's a little bit of, stuff down here. So I'm going to try tracing this again. Let's maybe drop the threshold a little bit. See if this looks any better. I think this actually looks worse because now this dark blue down here is making all this kind of weird squiggly kind of stuff. I don't really like that one, so I'm going to delete it. Maybe I should go higher with the threshold. Let's try 0.55. Whatever the case, as you're doing this, you should probably try 3 or 4 different ones just to see what looks good. I don't know, I don't really have a huge preference. I don't think it's making a huge difference, so I'm going to stick with this one. Delete the original picture, we don't need that anymore. This is what we're aiming to keep. So now I need this to fit on this board here. So to do that, I need to resize this. Now, if it's the exact same width as it is height, it pretty much is, I'm going to hit this lock button because I know that I want this shape to be exactly 96 millimeters wide. Okay. Now, in theory, the edge of this should line up with the edge of that board there. I'd say that looks pretty good. Okay. So, what we need to do, because I have a red line cutting through the middle of this logo right now, we need to change our board shape to be able to include this new shape that we're adding onto it. And this black and white picture, this needs to be on the top layer, so make sure you raise it to the top so that it's actually getting engraved on the surface of this whole thing. So what we're going to need to do, is copy this here picture. So Control C to copy it, Control V down here. Again, you could duplicate it, it doesn't really matter. And with this duplicate, what I want to do is break it apart completely so that it breaks into 1,000 different pieces. I don't need all these pieces. Actually, the only part of this one that I need is this outside ring, and that's it. So the rest of it, I'm going to drag a big box around it, hit delete. This, now, I need this to be the same settings as this box in order to do that Boolean function that I'm talking about. So this needs to be white fill, shift, and click red to do that. And the stroke size needs to be 0.1 pixel. Okay, now I need these two things to line up in exactly the right place, which is the tough part, because if I've added a bunch of extra space on the bottom, what I really want to try to get is the midpoint of this circle to match up with the midline of this one here. It's easy to align the two in the middle of each other. Oh, that looks really good right now. Maybe I shouldn't mess it up, but I will, for science. So lining the circle up exactly in the middle of this other piece, what I'm going to use now is the X and Y coordinate system of Inkscape. So this one here, the XY coordinate system starts in the bottom left corner here. So just to keep things simple, I'm going to make this box start at 10 in the x-axis and 10 in the y-axis. So this should be down here. It's 10 millimeters from each edge. That looks good to me. Next, I need this to line up. And I'm quite sure that the x-axis should be the same. It should be 10 millimeters. So that should be lined up in the middle of this other piece now. And I made this one 10 millimeters larger than the top of this piece. So if my math is right, this should be somewhere around, oops, oh, wrong button. Oh no, wrong button. Oh no, wrong button. Okay, that's better. In the Y axis here, I should be about 20 millimeters from the top. See how that looks. Hey, looking good. That looks good. So if you're wondering why that worked, the bottom of my part here is at 20 millimeters from the bottom. And I know that that would be the right size because this box is 48 millimeters. And I added 3 millimeters for this little jog. And I added 7 millimeters of just air gap so that we don't have our part right at the bottom of the box. So 3 and 7 is 10. So that part would be 10 millimeters higher than this part. So let's zoom in on these corners and see how close we got it. I'd say this is pretty darn good. Okay. So if your two parts are sitting over top of each other well like this, select one, hold shift, select the other one. Everything should be the same. The fill's the same, the stroke is the same. Everything's 0.1 pixel thick. Go to path and make a union. Oh, that's beautiful. So now our circle ends right as this straight line begins. The other side looks good as well. Okay, so we're very close to finish. We just need this and this to get aligned together, which means I want them to be centered on each other. And if we line up, say, the top edges, everything should be in the right place. So you can just barely see that red line up there. Maybe you can't see it, but it is there. The red line comes around the side here. Our Glacier Kings logo is on the front. And all the red lines are 0.1 pixel thick. So this is ready to go. I'm going to save this for myself, just so that I have a copy of this in case something goes wrong or in case I need to hand it in. So save as, and I'm going to save this to my own OneDrive. And we'll call this Edge-Lit Acrylic, Glacier Kings, something like that. And I'm going to save as to send it over to the laser. Send it to this PC, school share, makerspace, laser Dropbox, and this needs to be a PDF. And yes, so that's it. That's making the acrylic part of the 6 LED Edge-Lit Acrylic.